Hello, everybody. My name is Pichu Manjo 8008, and welcome back to another episode of this podcast. Which, very frankly, when you sit back and think about it, this has been a project of mine for about 2 years now, but I have not made very much substantial progress on it. And that's something I kind of want to do more of. I'm gaining more and more free time by the day, besides work, because I have job requirements and responsibilities to tend to these days. But I have more and more time these days to work on videos, as evidenced by the recent, burst of videos that you saw earlier. However, whenever you're watching this, there's just a lot of videos, several days concurrently, consecutively. So, that was good. That was a good burst of productivity, and I think that's probably starting to end. Because the reason that happened was A, I got sick, so B, I was able to stay home for prolonged periods of time, and that enabled me to make a lot more videos than I would be able to otherwise, like if I were in school, say, for 87 hours a day or whatever. So yeah, that's coming to an end, though, because I am still recovering from my sickness, but I am back at school. So, that's that whole situation. Speaking of being sick and just not well in general, I've been suffering from a lot of weird insomnia problems, and they're there for a lot of issues, I think. Sickness probably factors into it, but it's for a multitude of issues that I've been struggling with insomnia for the past few days. So, one day, this has been happening for a few days, on the second or third day, I had gone through several days of going to bed at 9 or 10 o'clock and then waking up at 3 a.m. and just not being able to go back to bed, which I don't think is the typical description of insomnia. I think typically insomnia is you just never fall asleep, and that's how it works. Mine is I fall asleep, but I only fall asleep for a few hours, and then I'm up at 3 and I'm up for the rest of the day, which is not terrific, to say the least. But I had several days in a row of insomnia there for a while, and on the third or fourth day, I finally decided, you know what, I don't want to spend this whole time just scrolling on my phone for hours. It feels like I'm wasting my life away with that. And so I decided to do something more productive, and I picked up a book and I read all of the hit book Animal Farm by George Orwell. Now, I feel like both Orwell's biggest works, Animal Farm and 1984, are usually required readings in a lot of high school English courses, but I had never read it before. And it's one of those culturally relevant things that I felt like I should have read, and I am very glad that I did read it because it was a very good book. And it was also a very short book, which is how I was able to finish it so quickly. It's the copy I have is 70 pages or so. And it's not written in weird old archaic language like a lot of other of the quote unquote classics are, which makes it pretty easy to get through. But I just wanted to I think I probably spent 3 hours total reading Animal Farm. I have some thoughts on it, and that's kind of what I wanted to have the podcast be about today because I thought it was a very good book and I wanted to talk about that. So this is going to kind of be a sort of jumbled up podcast because I have a lot of notes on it. I'm kind of just going to go through my bullet points and talk about them individually. So firstly, the whole thing obviously is a very good metaphor for Stalinist Soviet Union circa the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s. And I think that's pretty obvious, but one thing that kind of struck me is just how fast it all happened, right? So, massive spoilers for the book, obviously. But the scene where, everything seems to be going well, and then Napoleon and Snowball have that fight, Snowball gets chased out by Napoleon's dogs, and all of a sudden, it's a dictatorship. That I thought was I don't know, it felt very strange to me because dictatorships often happen pretty slowly over time. But then I went back and retrospectively looked at everything. I was like, I guess they have been building to Napoleon being a kind of dictator character. Even like the things that they do, they compare, not directly, but Snowball is very clearly supposed to be Leon Trotsky in this story, right? And Napoleon is supposed to be Stalin. And they both even have like their character traits. Like Napoleon is not as well spoken as Snowball is, but he is very fierce. He knows what he wants and he knows how to get to it, and he's a smart man and smart pig, excuse me. And then later on in the book, like Stalin, he becomes a very paranoid pig as well. Whereas Snowball is very much a talker. He's charismatic, he's persuasive, and he's very good at making speeches. And then he gets chased out, much like Leon Trotsky. He got chased out by Stalin when Stalin, quote unquote, won the right to be in charge of the Soviet Union. And there's not really any evidence to show that Snowball was killed with an ice pick, like Leon Trotsky was, at the hands of Joseph Stalin and his minions. But I think there can be some assumptions that are made there. So if we're very clearly setting up this metaphor where Snowball is Trotsky and Napoleon is Stalin, then there's obviously a lot of other characters who we could also fit into that metaphor. So like, for example, I think Mr. Jones probably represents kind of the chaos that was happening in Russia prior to the October Revolution, right? So he's like kind of the previous governments. The sheep, I think, are very good, like, subliminal choices, I guess, is kind of a weird way to describe it, but it's true. The sheep are quite literally sheeple, right? The only thing they ever say throughout the whole book is the mantra, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. Just constantly, that's all they say. And they use that to break up arguments and to stop conversations from happening. And that's pretty interesting, because they're just like the sheeple. I don't know if those really existed much in Soviet times, but like the people who just kind of listen to Stalin and reiterate what he says while being just very naive to the whole sort of situation that's going on at hand. And then characters like Muriel and Benjamin, I think, can also be explained away. They're like the really old, wise. I don't know if they're wise, but they're like the very old animals on the farm. They've seen a lot of stuff. I would imagine they're sort of a parallel to all the people in the Soviet Union who like grew up before the Marxism times, right? And have seen Russia sort of transform over the years. I'm kind of using Russia and the Soviet Union and USSR and all those terms synonymously, so just bear with me. Those are kind of like the people who started pre-Marxism, and then they've kind of seen how Russia progresses into communism, dictatorship, Stalin, cruelty, gulags, all of that throughout the years is, I think, what their role is. Boxer is supposed to represent, I think, and I think this one's pretty obvious, he's the working class, so he kind of just believes everything that Napoleon, aka Stalin, tells him to do, and his mantra, I can always work harder, or I will work harder, or whatever he repeats throughout the book, I think is just, he's the kulaks, right? He's the rising working class. And his death near the end of the book, or when he gets hurt and he gets sent off to be made into glue, I think that is very reminiscent of how flippant Stalin was with this kulak class, which he himself came from, and he was willing to just sort of turn them over and toss them to the side. So I think those are all good metaphors. And I think after determining those metaphors, as well as being amidst a sort of separate study of like Gulag-era Russia, Stalinist Russia, during those times of communism, dictatorship, all that, which I guess is still under a communist dictatorship, but not quite to that extreme, I think that really affected how I viewed Animal Farm. It was a very good book. Like, the portrayal of gaslighting in that book is very, very, very good. And, like, we as the audience know it, right? And especially me as the audience, having read it over the course of one day, so I can very easily recall back to previous moments in the story, like all those times where they're like, I thought the commandment said this. And then they think back to what originally the commandment was, and now they look at the commandment, and it has changed. And I thought that was very good, just representation, because they did that in Stalinist Soviet Union. They, convinced people that what they had been thinking about Russia was fake lies, it had never existed, and then sort of retconned their own history, if that makes sense. I thought that was really good. The use of gaslighting throughout the novella, I think it's a novella, that was really, really good, I thought. So anyway, there's all these metaphors, all of these fear tactics going on in this book, right? They seem very narrowly paralleled to the Soviet Union during these times. But that kind of got me thinking, could Animal Farm, could you make it be about any communist dictatorship? Could Animal Farm feasibly be a stand-in for Cuba, or for North Korea, or for China? And I think the answer to that is probably yes, right? There's a charismatic leader guy who's very strong. He knows what he wants to do. He puts himself in power. Over time, he starts taking things from the public. So right, Napoleon goes well, we pigs need to be respected. We need the space to work. So we're going to live in the farmhouse now. We need more food than you guys get. We're going to have alcohol. We're going to host parties. Napoleon makes very few appearances in public by the end of the book, and usually just goes through his other people to transport the messages and do the job for him. And that happened in all of these countries, which Cuba with Fidel Castro, very charismatic man who ended up ruling over the country with an iron fist, right? North Korea has been in some weird sort of dictatorship for a long time now, and China, Xi Jinping, who just recently, a few years ago declared himself president for life. So, I think while Animal Farm was written specifically with these Russian metaphors in mind, and Boxer, for example, there's not really, an equivalent of the rising middle class, the kulaks, in Cuba as there was in Russia, simply because their situation's not the same. There's not, a whole bunch of serfs who are recently getting out of their sort of slavery and stuff. But I feel the broad strokes of the story are the same and can be analogous to each other. Another sort of topic that I wondered about while reading the story is so Stalin was actually going insane, right? I don't think that's too much of a controversial opinion to say that Stalin was just going insane, that he was irrationally paranoid to some extent. Was Napoleon supposed to be that? Or was Napoleon just manipulative, right? Because Stalin very obviously was also manipulative, but his manipulation came from a root of irrational fear and paranoia that something was coming for him. Whereas Napoleon, nothing is really fighting for his throne. Is he also going insane? Is he also just endlessly paranoid? Or is he just super manipulative? Because a lot of the things that Stalin did, he did out of fear. I get the feeling that a lot of the things Napoleon did, he did because he could, right? He had the power to do whatever he wanted, and so he did. And then finally, I kind of wanted to talk about some of the difficulties of adapting Animal Farm into a film, because it's been done twice before, and I think there's a third one in production right now that's slated to release 2025 at some point. First of all, it's very obviously difficult I think the biggest difficulty is that the animals in Animal Farm speak, right? And they not only speak to each other, but they also speak to the humans, because that's how they correspond with the outside world. And the ending scene would not work if Napoleon could not speak with the humans. So the humans understand what the animals are saying. But in movies, that's kind of hard to do. That's kind of a weird, cringy thing where you end up with live action Lion Kings type stuff, except it's almost like if they did a live action Tarzan, which who knows, maybe if they did, but it's animals and people talking to each other, not through like telepathy though, or telekinesis or whatever that's called. So I will admit I haven't watched the 1956 version or whatever that one was from. I have watched about halfway through the 1999 version of this movie, and I will say I do not like the use of the animals. Like, I do not like that the animals can talk to each other, but the humans can't understand them. Because that is kind of a central part of the story, is that the humans can understand them. Or maybe the humans can only understand the pigs, and that's a metaphor because the humans are the pigs. Surprise, surprise. So, I don't know. I didn't like that about the movie, and obviously there's a lot of other difficulties adapting this sort of story into a movie. I thought personally, like watching the movie, that the best way to adapt Animal Farm into a movie would be to make the animals say nothing. I think that would be more effective. I think that'd be scarier. I think if we were shown what was happening, the gradual progression of Animal Farm without any words, I think that would be the best way of telling that story. And now, obviously, the whole story is kind of set into motion by Major's whole speech, which would be kind of impossible if nobody said any words, but you would have to work around that, I think. Maybe adapt that to a different thing. But yeah, I think that's, if I were to adapt Animal Farm into a movie, that would be how I would do it, because I don't think the two Animal Farm movies that exist right now quite capture it in that perfect way that I think Orwell was going for. And now my final opinions of the book, just because I'm running out of recording time, is that it has some really, really good quotes in it. Like, this is a very quotable book, and I think Orwell probably knew that because he wrote in some very good quotes. And obviously, there's obviously like the quote of 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, right? Which slowly gets changed over time into 4 legs good, 2 legs better as the pigs start walking upright. And I thought that was a very good reveal. My favorite reveal, actually, was at the very end of the book when they're looking at the commandments, which have all been replaced with the one commandment, which says, all animals are equal, but some are more equal. And I thought that was really good. And then the final quote of the book, and I'll read it to you because I have the book up right now. It's the last paragraph. This is how the book ends. It goes, 12 voices were shouting in anger, and they were all alike. No question now what had happened to the faces of the pigs. The creatures outside looked from pig to man, and from man to pig, and from pig to man again, but already it was impossible to say which was which. And I thought that was a really good way to end off a book like that. For such a short book, it packs a lot of... It's very meaningful. It's very impactful. So, yeah, I thought Animal Farm was really good. I don't think any of the insights that I have in this video probably are insights that have not been heard before. I don't think there are any revolutionary insights. But that was like kind of how I just needed to process the book, because I thought it was a very good book. The metaphor was perfect. And I highly would recommend that book over 1984 by Orwell. Controversial maybe, but Animal Farm is very, very good. Anyways, thank you for listening. Hopefully there will be another one of these out soon, because I have some more topics to talk about. Goodbye.